In the realm of horror, some stories cut deeper than others, especially when they draw from the chilling depths of real events. The following tales are more than just movies. They are horrifying accounts rooted in documented experiences, unexplained phenomena, and real-life crimes. From brutal hauntings and demonic possessions to cult-led violence and cruel betrayals of trust, each story offers a glimpse into humanity's darkest encounters with forces that defy reason and morality. What you're about to read delves beyond Hollywood's fiction, exploring the actual events and people whose lives inspired some of the most disturbing horror films ever made. Each narrative shines a light on the shadowy line between fact and fiction, showing how true horror often surpasses anything conjured in a script. These are not just ghost stories. They are testimonies to terror, brutality, and the mysteries that linger in our world, waiting for the unwary. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. In a small town in Germany during the early 1970s, a young woman named Anneliese Michel began experiencing strange and uncontrollable episodes, ones that defied all conventional understanding. At first, they were small things, visions she couldn't explain, shadows that felt too close, and voices she was certain only she could hear. But soon, these incidents escalated beyond all measure, turning her once peaceful life into a relentless nightmare that baffled even her most trusted confidants. This story, the one that inspired the Exorcism of Emily Rose, would go on to ignite a heated debate across the globe about the boundaries of faith, medicine, and mental health. Anneliese's symptoms began in 1968 when, at 16, she experienced her first episode of what would later be identified as tonic-clonic seizures. After a visit to a neurologist, Anneliese was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition known to cause hallucinations and convulsions. Doctors prescribed medication, but her episodes continued, and over time, her condition grew far worse. By 1973, she was experiencing paralyzing visions of demonic faces during her daily prayers and hearing strange voices urging her to do horrifying things. Anneliese's devout Catholic faith had always been a fundamental part of her life, and as her symptoms grew more intense, so did her conviction that she was not merely sick, she was possessed. Unable to find solace through medical treatment, Anneliese and her family sought the counsel of local priests, hoping to receive an exorcism. The Catholic Church, however, was hesitant. Modern exorcisms were rare, and only a bishop could grant such a request, typically only in cases where all medical options had been exhausted. For over a year, the Michel family continued to press the church, until finally Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Rentz received permission to perform the ritual. Between 1975 and 1976, Anneliese endured 67 exorcism sessions, each lasting up to 4 hours. The grueling rituals were brutal. At times, Anneliese refused to eat, believing she was unworthy of sustenance. Throughout the sessions, she exhibited behavior that horrified even the most faithful. Accounts describe her speaking in voices that were not her own, identifying herself as various entities, including Lucifer, Judas, Nero, and others believed to be damned souls. She is said to have performed impossible feats of strength, once reportedly throwing her own body across the room with unnatural force. Anneliese's behavior grew more extreme as her health deteriorated, her body wasting away as she continued to refuse food, convinced she was serving a greater purpose by her suffering. In 1976, after a final exorcism, Anneliese Michel died of malnutrition and dehydration at the age of 23. Her death led to an immediate investigation, and her parents, along with the 2 priests who had performed the exorcisms, were charged with negligent homicide. In the subsequent trial, the defense argued that Anneliese was possessed, that her death was a tragic but inevitable result of a supernatural affliction. Prosecutors, however, pointed to epilepsy and psychosis, arguing that Anneliese's symptoms were indicative of mental illness and that she had been denied life-saving medical care. In the end, the court sentenced her parents and the priests to 6 months in prison, suspended, and 3 years of probation. The ruling ignited public debate and became a landmark case in the conversation about mental health, faith, and the responsibility of the Church. Anneliese's case remains one of the most chilling and controversial stories of exorcism to this day, blurring the line between supernatural belief and psychological distress in a way that leaves questions for believers and skeptics alike. The Haunting in Connecticut. When the Snedeker family moved to Southington, Connecticut in 1986, they thought they had found the perfect home. It was close to the hospital where Carmen and Al Snedeker's teenage son, Philip, was undergoing treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma. The house, which was spacious and affordable, seemed ideal, until they discovered its disturbing past. Unbeknownst to them, their new home had once been a funeral parlor. In the basement, the family found strange tools, including a gurney and toe tags, remnants of the building's former life, as the Hallahan Funeral Home. As the family settled in, strange occurrences began, events that would later inspire the horror film The Haunting in Connecticut. Philip, already weakened by his illness, was the first to report unsettling experiences. He claimed he saw apparitions of men in dark suits, shadowy figures that moved silently throughout the house. His behavior shifted drastically. He became withdrawn and angry, traits that his family initially attributed to his illness. But soon, the strange phenomena spread beyond Philip. Other family members began experiencing inexplicable events. Strange sounds echoed through the house at night. The scent of decay would fill rooms at random, and objects would move on their own. Carmen, Philip's mother, began to sense a dark presence in the house. She claimed that she would feel touches from invisible hands and hear voices whispering. The intensity of the experiences grew. Al Snedeker, Carmen's husband, reported seeing spectral figures, while Philip's siblings encountered what they described as malevolent spirits lurking in dark corners. The family claimed that the haunting wasn't merely frightening, it was violent. Carmen alleged that some of the spirits physically attacked her, and others in the family claimed to have been similarly touched, scratched, or pushed by unseen forces. Desperate for help, the Snedekers reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the well-known paranormal investigators who came to the house to assess the situation. The Warrens concluded that the funeral home's former occupants had not all moved on, that some spirits lingered with malevolent intent. According to the Warrens, some of these spirits had been drawn to the energy of Philip's illness and the family's vulnerable state, creating an atmosphere ripe for paranormal activity. The Warrens performed a series of cleansing rituals, hoping to rid the house of its dark presence. They claimed that the home was indeed infested with demonic spirits that had gained strength from its history and the energy left behind by the funerary practices once performed there. But even after their intervention, the Snedekers continued to experience haunting phenomena, prompting them to eventually move out. The story of the Snedeker haunting captured public attention, but it also sparked controversy. Skeptics questioned the family's accounts, arguing that some events may have been exaggerated, while others dismissed the paranormal explanations entirely. However, for the Snedekers, the terror was all too real. To this day, their story stands as one of the most harrowing accounts of supernatural hauntings, a case that delves into the unnerving idea that a place can retain the energies of its darkest past. The Annabelle Doll. In 1970, a seemingly ordinary Raggedy Ann doll became one of the most infamous objects in paranormal history. It started innocuously enough, a gift from a mother to her daughter, Donna, a nursing student who shared an apartment with her friend Angie. At first, the doll, dressed in its signature red and white outfit, seemed a charming, whimsical decoration. But soon, Donna and Angie noticed strange, almost unexplainable occurrences that left them both deeply unsettled. The doll seemed to move on its own, shifting positions and even changing rooms without any clear explanation. This was only the beginning. The roommates began to find notes around their apartment, written in childlike handwriting on parchment paper, which they didn't keep in their home. The messages were hauntingly simple, reading, "Help us," or "Help Lou." Lou was a friend of Donna's and Angie's, and he had always felt uneasy around the doll, sensing something menacing about it. Then, things took an even darker turn. Donna found what appeared to be drops of blood on the doll's hands and chest, with no explanation of where it came from. The incidents grew increasingly disturbing, prompting Donna to seek help. Desperate for answers, Donna and Angie reached out to a psychic medium. The medium claimed the doll was possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died tragically on the property years before. According to the medium, Annabelle's spirit felt lonely and attached herself to the doll, hoping to stay close to the living. Moved by this story, Donna gave Annabelle permission to inhabit the doll. But rather than bringing peace, this decision seemed to unleash something far darker and more violent. Lou, who had always felt uneasy about the doll, began to experience direct attacks. In one incident, he awoke from a deep sleep, unable to move, with the doll staring at him from the foot of his bed. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if someone or something had slashed him. When he looked down, he saw claw-like marks, deep scratches that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The doll's malevolent nature was becoming clear, and the roommates decided they needed more than a medium's advice. This led them to contact Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators known for their work in dealing with spirit possession and haunted objects. Upon examining the doll, the Warrens concluded it was not possessed by a harmless child spirit, but by a demon seeking to manipulate and eventually take control of a human host. According to the Warrens, demonic entities often use human sympathy and false identities to invite themselves into a person's life, and Annabelle was no exception. The Warrens arranged for an exorcism of the apartment to cleanse it of the evil presence. They took Annabelle with them, deeming it too dangerous to leave her with Donna and Angie. The doll was placed in a glass case in the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut, where it remains to this day, sealed with warnings and blessed regularly to prevent further harm. Visitors have reported feeling uneasy, and some have even claimed unusual accidents after taunting or disrespecting the doll. The Annabelle doll continues to fascinate and frighten paranormal enthusiasts worldwide, as it remains a haunting reminder that sometimes the most innocuous objects can harbor the darkest forces. The entity. In the summer of 1974, a single mother named Doris Bither claimed she was being attacked in ways that left her fearful for her life and the safety of her children. Living in a modest home in Culver City, California, Doris reported a series of deeply disturbing events that became the basis for the 1982 film The Entity. According to Doris, these events went far beyond typical ghostly encounters. She claimed she was being sexually assaulted by an unseen force, with the attacks becoming more violent and frequent over time. Doris's life had already been marked by challenges. She had 4 children, all of whom lived with her in the small house, and she had endured years of personal and familial turmoil. But nothing prepared her for the trauma she would experience in that home. She reported that strange disturbances began shortly after moving in. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker inexplicably, and a sense of oppressive energy filled the air. However, these eerie incidents soon turned sinister when Doris claimed to have been physically assaulted by an unseen entity. She told her children about violent attacks occurring at night, often leaving her bruised, battered, and deeply shaken. Desperate for help, Doris reached out to Dr. Barry Taff and Kerry Gaynor, parapsychologists from the University of California, Los Angeles. They specialized in investigating paranormal phenomena, but even they were initially skeptical of Doris's claims. However, after arriving at the home, they reported feeling an immediate, intense energy in the space. Doris's account, along with the physical evidence of her injuries, convinced Taff and Gaynor to continue their investigation. Over the course of several visits, they documented phenomena that they described as unlike anything they had ever encountered. In one investigation, Taff and his team reported witnessing strange lights that seemed to form in mid-air. These balls of light would flash across the room, materializing and then vanishing as if under some mysterious, intelligent control. The investigators also described photographing orbs and other unexplained shapes that appeared around Doris during particularly heightened periods of the haunting. According to Taff, several members of the investigative team saw apparitions, figures that seemed to take on humanoid shapes but would quickly dissolve when approached. As they continued their investigation, Doris claimed that the assaults grew worse, often occurring while investigators were present. On multiple occasions, they reported seeing Doris thrown across the room by an invisible force. Her children, too, witnessed their mother's suffering and described strange, shadowy figures lurking in the house. These apparitions, they said, were accompanied by an unbearable smell and a sense of overwhelming dread. Despite the documented phenomena and Doris's visible injuries, the scientific community remained divided on the validity of her claims. While some believed Doris was experiencing a severe psychological breakdown, possibly exacerbated by the environment of the house, Others argued that the sheer volume of corroborated evidence was hard to ignore. After several months, Doris finally left the house, hoping to escape whatever malevolent force had targeted her. However, she claimed the attacks continued intermittently even after moving, suggesting that the entity or entities had attached themselves to her personally. Doris Bither's case remains one of the most controversial and disturbing in paranormal research. It raises chilling questions about the nature of unseen forces and whether they can inflict real, lasting harm on those they target. Though some have cast doubt on her story, the case persists in paranormal lore, both as a disturbing tale of unexplained trauma and as a reminder of the uncharted realms within paranormal study. The Exorcist. In 1949, a 14-year-old boy from Maryland, known in accounts by the pseudonym Roland Doe, would become the center of one of the most famous exorcism cases in history. This chilling story would later inspire The Exorcist, a film that captured imaginations and fears worldwide. What began as innocent attempts at contacting the supernatural quickly escalated into a harrowing ordeal that left both spiritual leaders and medical experts deeply unsettled. The terrifying events surrounding Roland's possession would test the boundaries of faith, science, and the unknown in ways that continue to haunt those involved. The ordeal started innocuously when Roland began playing with a Ouija board at his aunt's suggestion. She had introduced him to the device, sparking his curiosity about the supernatural. Shortly after her death, Roland began experiencing strange phenomena. Scratching and knocking sounds echoed through his family's home, seemingly coming from within the walls. His family initially suspected a rodent infestation, but as the noises grew louder and objects began moving on their own, they were forced to consider a darker possibility. Then, Roland's behavior changed in disturbing ways. His family noticed him speaking in a deep, guttural voice that seemed beyond his natural ability, and he developed a hatred toward religious symbols. He would break into uncontrollable fits, thrashing wildly and speaking in languages he had never studied. Desperate and frightened, Roland's family reached out to medical doctors and psychologists, hoping for a diagnosis that would explain the terrifying changes. Yet every medical assessment left them with more questions than answers. When physical scars and welts began appearing on Roland's body, his family turned to the church for help. The family was referred to Father E. Albert Hughes, a Catholic priest who initially attempted an exorcism at a local hospital. During this attempt, Roland allegedly broke free from his restraints, managing to slash the priest's arm with a metal spring that had somehow dislodged from his bed. After this failed exorcism, Father Hughes stepped away from the case, deeply disturbed by the incident. However, Roland's condition only grew worse. Eventually, Roland's family reached out to two more priests, Father Walter Halloran and Father William Bowden, who were experienced in handling paranormal cases. Over several weeks, they performed dozens of exorcism sessions, each session testing the limits of their faith. Witnesses reported Roland exhibiting superhuman strength, often requiring multiple adults to hold him down. He would thrash violently, scream profanities, and convulse as though in unimaginable pain. During these sessions, words such as hell and evil allegedly appeared scratched into his skin, leaving the priests and onlookers in utter horror. Father Halloran later described moments during the exorcism where objects flew across the room, and Roland would speak in voices that sounded distinctly unhuman. According to reports, he would also reveal deeply personal information about the priests' lives, facts that he could not have possibly known. Finally, after one particularly intense session, Roland is said to have come out of his trance and uttered the words, "He's gone." After that moment, the phenomena ceased, and Roland appeared to return to his normal self. Following the exorcism, Roland's family moved, hoping to put the ordeal behind them. The Catholic Church documented the case meticulously, but it was never formally recognized, leaving an air of mystery around the events. Roland's identity remained a closely guarded secret, though investigative journalists and curious minds have sought to uncover the details behind the boy whose life inspired The Exorcist. This case is still one of the most documented and most debated exorcism cases, symbolizing the perpetual struggle between faith and the unexplained forces that lurk just beyond the reach of human understanding. Deliver us from evil. In New York City, where crime and danger are daily realities, NYPD officer Ralph Sarchi was no stranger to life's darker side. His years patrolling some of the toughest neighborhoods had exposed him to the grittiest corners of humanity. But nothing could have prepared him for the bizarre and terrifying cases that would soon blur the lines between the natural and the supernatural. Cases so dark that Sarchi would eventually recount them in his memoir, Beware the Night, which later inspired Deliver Us from Evil. Sarchi's path into the world of the paranormal began with his close partnership with Father Mendoza, a priest with expertise in exorcism and the occult. Together, the two began to confront cases of disturbing possession and demonic activity. What began as curiosity quickly evolved into Sarchi's personal mission to protect the public from unseen dangers he once believed were mere superstition. One of Sarchi's earliest cases involved a woman named Dominic, who was plagued by violent outbursts and a drastic change in personality, shocking her family. Her body would contort, her voice would shift into an unnatural growl, and she would display knowledge of things that were impossible for her to know. Her family, terrified, sought help from the church, who sent Father Mendoza to assess the situation. The priest quickly determined that Dominic's affliction was not medical or psychological, but rather demonic in nature. Sarchi accompanied Father Mendoza during Dominic's exorcism and witnessed firsthand the struggle to free her from what they believed was a powerful, malevolent entity. During the ritual, she screamed and spat, her strength requiring several people to hold her down as her voice shifted into a deep, otherworldly tone that mocked and cursed those attempting to help her. Another case that left Sarchi forever changed involved a young boy who was tormented by a shadowy figure that only he could see. The boy's family reported hearing strange noises at night, scratching, whispering, and footsteps echoing through the house, even when no one was moving. Sarchi observed that the child would wake up with bruises and scratches, claiming that the figure in the shadows had hurt him. Despite their initial skepticism, Sarchi and Mendoza soon became convinced that the family was dealing with an authentic demonic presence. These cases, and countless others like them, forced Sarchi to confront his own beliefs about good and evil, faith and skepticism. Witnessing exorcisms, possessions and confrontations with forces he could neither see nor explain brought Sarchi to a place of spiritual crisis and awakening. His experiences transformed his approach to life, adding a dimension of faith and humility that he had never known before. By night, he was a hardened cop, but in his off hours, he became a self-proclaimed demonologist, devoted to aiding people who believed they were experiencing demonic hauntings or possessions. Sarchi's memoir details his transformation from a skeptical police officer to a man willing to risk his safety and sanity to confront an unseen evil. His story has left readers and later audiences of Deliver Us from Evil questioning the true nature of the unknown forces that can lurk in the shadows of daily life. His dedication to these cases serves as a testament to his belief that some evils require more than just courage. They require faith, strength, and an unyielding resolve to face the darkest depths of human experience. Silent House. The story behind Silent House is one of mystery, fear, and psychological trauma, reportedly inspired by real events in a secluded home in Uruguay. In the late 1940s, a young woman and her father moved into an isolated house in the Uruguayan countryside with the intention of repairing it. Their plan was simple: stay a few days, assess the damage, and get the house ready for the market. But as soon as they settled in, the house began to reveal its own dark secrets. Their first night was plagued by strange sounds, scratches on the walls, faint footsteps in empty rooms, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, the young woman assumed these were natural sounds in an old house. But by the second night, her sense of dread deepened as the noises became more deliberate, almost as if someone or something was trying to communicate or make its presence known. The woman reported feeling a growing sense of paranoia, like she was being watched constantly by an unseen presence. On the third night, things took a turn for the worse. The young woman's father left to inspect the upper floor, leaving her downstairs. Alone, she began hearing faint cries echoing through the house, followed by what sounded like heavy breathing directly behind her. She spun around to find nothing. Panicked, she called out for her father but received no answer. She began searching the house room by room, each one darker and more claustrophobic than the last. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the scent of decay and something indescribable. She finally reached the top floor, where she found her father slumped and unresponsive, his face frozen in a look of terror. But she had no time to process the scene because she suddenly felt hands gripping her shoulders, as if someone were physically holding her in place. In her own account, the young woman recalled being unable to scream, her voice choked by an unseen force. She fled the house in a frenzy, eventually making it to a nearby village where she sought help. When she returned with local authorities, they found no trace of an intruder. Her father, however, had passed away, his cause of death officially listed as a heart attack. Locals whispered that the house was cursed, and previous owners had experienced similar inexplicable occurrences. No one knew why, but the property developed a reputation, with locals avoiding it altogether and warning others of its haunted nature. Decades later, the story behind Silent House continues to spark debate. Some believe the young woman's experience was a result of psychological distress, heightened by isolation and fear. Others insist that the house held something malevolent, a force that had driven past occupants to madness or worse. Whatever the truth, her tale remains a haunting reminder of the impact that trauma and fear can have on the mind. Whether paranormal or psychological, the young woman's experience in the Silent House remains one of Uruguay's most enduring mysteries. The Girl Next Door. In the summer of 1965, Sylvia Likens, a 16-year-old girl from Indianapolis, became the tragic center of one of the most disturbing child abuse cases in American history. This real-life horror would later inspire The Girl Next Door, a fictionalized film that closely mirrors the relentless cruelty Sylvia suffered. Sylvia's story is not one of supernatural forces or paranormal events. Instead, it's a grim reminder of the capacity for human cruelty when empathy is absent and accountability fails. Sylvia Likens was the daughter of carnival workers, leading a nomadic and often unstable life. That summer, Sylvia's parents, needing to leave for work, arranged for her and her younger sister Jenny to stay with Gertrude Banizewski, a single mother of 7. Gertrude agreed to take care of the Likens sisters for a payment of $20 per week. But when payments began arriving late, Gertrude's initial frustrations escalated into something far more sinister, and Sylvia became the primary target of her anger and resentment. The abuse started with verbal insults, but quickly grew to include physical violence. Gertrude's cruelty was severe. She beat Sylvia regularly, deprived her of food, and often locked her in the basement. Over time, the abuse took on an almost ritualistic quality, with Gertrude involving her own children in Sylvia's torture. Neighborhood kids, too, would come by to watch, and in some cases, join in the torment. Gertrude encouraged these acts, casting Sylvia as a scapegoat and spreading lies to justify the inhumane treatment. As the abuse intensified, Sylvia endured increasingly brutal attacks. She was forced to strip in front of others and was subjected to humiliating and degrading acts. At one point, Gertrude carved slurs into Sylvia's abdomen using a heated needle, marking her with words that added another layer of dehumanization to her suffering. Despite her intense physical and emotional pain, Sylvia tried to maintain her dignity, but she was entirely isolated and unable to escape the horrors inflicted on her. Neighbors and visitors occasionally witnessed Sylvia's condition or heard her cries from the basement, but few intervened. In a final act of horror, after months of relentless abuse, Sylvia's body finally gave out. On October 26, 1965, she died from her injuries, a combination of prolonged malnutrition, dehydration, and brutal physical trauma. The discovery of Sylvia's body led to a full investigation, shocking law enforcement and the Indianapolis community as they uncovered the full extent of her abuse. Gertrude Banizewski, her children, and several neighborhood participants were arrested and faced trial. Gertrude and her eldest daughter were ultimately convicted, bringing some measure of justice, though many argued it could never truly make up for the horrors Sylvia had endured. The story of Sylvia Likens has haunted American memory ever since. It stands as a sobering example of unchecked power, cruelty, and the consequences of bystander inaction. The Girl Next Door captures the essence of Sylvia's ordeal, forcing audiences to confront the darkest corners of human behavior. The strangers, The terror depicted in The Strangers was partly inspired by real-life events involving unexplained home invasions and brutal murders, chillingly similar to the film's plot. While the movie itself is a work of fiction, writer-director Brian Bertino drew from both his own childhood experiences with door-knocking strangers and a violent, unsolved 1981 crime known as the Keddie Cabin Murders. In Bertino's personal experience, a stranger had once come to his family's door when he was a child, asking if someone who didn't live there was home. His parents later discovered that this tactic was a common method used by burglars who would knock on random doors and target the houses that went unanswered. This seemingly benign encounter stayed with Bertino, later forming the unsettling framework for The Strangers, where masked intruders target a young couple simply because they are home. However, the film's depiction of a vicious home invasion also echoes the horrifying reality of the Keddie Cabin Murders. In April 1981, a mother named Glenna Sue Sharp and her family were staying in a remote cabin in Keddie, California. On the night of April 11th, the peace of their secluded retreat was shattered by a brutal assault. Sue, her son Johnny, and Johnny's friend Dana Wingate were violently attacked and murdered inside their cabin, their bodies found bound with electrical wiring and covered in injuries suggesting a prolonged and merciless attack. Sue's 12-year-old daughter Tina was missing, and the case became one of the most disturbing mysteries in California's history. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were horrified by the carnage. The Sharps' cabin was splattered with blood, suggesting a chaotic struggle. The three youngest Sharp children were found unharmed in an adjacent room, but they had reportedly heard some of the events and were too frightened to leave. Tina's body wasn't discovered until 3 years later, when her skeletal remains were found 30 miles from the cabin site. Despite intense investigations and numerous theories, the case remains unsolved. Law enforcement struggled to explain the motive or why such brutal violence would be visited upon this isolated family. The Keddie murders, filled with unanswered questions, remain one of the most disturbing unsolved cases of home invasion horror in American history. The Strangers amplifies these real-life horrors, centering on a couple whose serene, isolated home is invaded by three masked intruders. The attacker's sole purpose appears to be causing terror and suffering, choosing their targets at random and showing no remorse. The intruders, eerily anonymous in doll-like masks, taunt and torment the couple throughout the night. The film never provides an explanation for the attacks, much like the Keddie case, leaving audiences with a raw sense of unease, forcing them to confront the possibility of motiveless evil. Both the real-life and fictional stories speak to the terrifying notion of random violence. The Strangers remains a nightmarish portrayal of how sometimes horror is not driven by logic or reason, but by an inexplicable darkness in certain individuals, leaving a haunting reminder that danger can strike without warning. Borderland. Borderland is a brutal thriller inspired by the true story of Adolfo Constanzo, a charismatic cult leader whose life of crime, occult practices, and ritualistic murders shocked Mexico and the United States in the late 1980s. Constanzo, a Cuban-American living in Mexico, had established himself as both a drug trafficker and a powerful padrino, or godfather, who claimed to be protected by dark supernatural forces. His rise and violent legacy reveal a harrowing look into a world where criminal ambition merged with occult rituals in one of the most chilling cases in Latin American history. Constanzo's cult, known as the Narco-Satanists, practiced a form of Palo Mayombe, a dark, ritualistic branch of Afro-Cuban religion, twisting its rites to serve Constanzo's own sadistic purposes. He claimed he could protect his cartel clients from law enforcement and rival gangs through blood sacrifices, which he performed regularly in a secluded ranch in Matamoros, Mexico. Initially, his sacrifices involved animals, but as his thirst for power grew, so did his demands. Constanzo began sacrificing humans, usually rival gang members or criminals from the borderlands who wouldn't be missed, in grisly rituals that he believed would bestow invincibility on himself and his followers. Constanzo's influence grew as his cult expanded, attracting followers who revered him for his claimed supernatural powers. His operations were highly organized, with participants including Sara Aldrete, a student who became known as the witch of the cult. Constanzo meticulously planned his ritualistic killings, often dismembering his victims, and using their remains in cauldrons to feed the spirits he believed granted him power. Local police and townspeople whispered about his mysterious ways, but few dared approach the ranch where his cult held its ceremonies. The terrifying reign of Constanzo might have continued if not for the 1989 disappearance of Mark Kilroy, an American college student on spring break in Matamoros. Kilroy was abducted and brought to Constanzo's ranch, where he was brutally tortured and ultimately killed in a sacrificial ritual. His murder triggered a widespread investigation by both Mexican and American law enforcement, who quickly traced Kilroy's disappearance back to Constanzo's cult. When police raided the ranch, they discovered makeshift altars and cauldrons filled with human remains, grisly evidence of Constanzo's deadly rituals. Shocked officers unearthed bodies of over a dozen victims, their dismembered corpses a testament to the horrors that had been taking place just beyond public view. As authorities closed in, Constanzo fled with several cult members, hiding in Mexico City. In a final standoff, he ordered a follower to kill him to avoid capture. His death did little to end the horror of his legacy, as authorities and journalists continued to uncover more about his cult's bloody practices and its unsettling influence on the drug trade. Borderland dramatizes this real-life nightmare, following a group of American college students who, like Kilroy, become entangled with a violent drug-smuggling cult, practicing ritual sacrifice. The film illustrates the terror and helplessness of confronting an organization so ruthless and unyielding that human life holds no value. Constanzo's story remains one of the darkest examples of the extremes of power, belief, and violence, a haunting reminder of the crimes that can arise when dangerous ambitions meet the unbridled human mind. Conclusion. As we close the book on these haunting stories, one thing is clear: truth is sometimes far more disturbing than fiction. For those who lived these horrors firsthand, their stories remain etched in the annals of mystery and tragedy. Whether through personal encounters with the paranormal, sinister forces lurking in quiet homes, or the brutalities inflicted by human hands, each tale reminds us of our vulnerability to forces we may never fully understand. These stories inspire caution, a call to remember that while we can often explain away the unknown, sometimes it's wise to leave the final word to the mysteries of the dark. So the next time you settle in to watch a horror film based on a true story, remember that the seeds of fiction are often planted in soil richer and far more terrifying than we can imagine. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious